The courthouse steps fell silent as Judge Amara Washington stood tall, holding the suspension letter for Officer Reynolds in one hand and evidence of his corruption in the other. 20 minutes earlier, she had been handcuffed on these same steps. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and redemption, tell us where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to follow Judge Amara's incredible journey from humiliation to vindication. What would you do if someone tried to strip away your dignity and authority in your own workplace? Judge Amara Washington woke up earlier than usual that morning, her mind already racing with thoughts about the landmark civil rights case she would be presiding over later that day. At 45 years old, with 15 years on the federal bench, Amara had earned her reputation as a fair and meticulous judge in the Hamilton County Courthouse in Cleveland, Ohio. This particular case involved allegations of police brutality that had captured national attention and divided the community along racial lines. The pressure was immense, but Amara had built her career on handling precisely these kinds of challenging cases with unwavering integrity. The morning had started with a gentle chaos that was typical in the Washington household. Her 17-year-old son Thomas needed help finalizing his personal statement for college applications. As a single mother, Amara always prioritized these moments with her son, even when her docket was overflowing. They sat at the kitchen counter, mugs of coffee between them, as she helped him refine his words about overcoming adversity and finding strength in his community. By the time they finished, Amara realized she was running behind schedule. She quickly dressed in a tailored navy suit and pearl earrings her grandmother had given her when she passed the bar exam. Her judicial robe was waiting in her chambers as always. She grabbed her briefcase filled with case notes she had meticulously prepared the night before and kissed Thomas goodbye. The drive to the courthouse was quick, but finding parking took longer than expected. By the time Amara approached the side entrance of the courthouse, the one typically used by staff and judges, she was moving with purpose. Her courthouse identification badge hung visibly from the lanyard around her neck as she nodded to the usual security guards she had known for years. But today, something was different. Officer Brian Patterson stood at the entrance, a white man with a military-style haircut and cold blue eyes that seemed to harden when they landed on Amara. At 38 years old, with 12 years on the force, Patterson was covering a shift for a colleague, a deviation from the normal security rotation. Amara had never seen him before, but she approached with the same professional confidence she carried everywhere. Patterson stepped directly into her path, his hand raising to stop her. His voice came out sharp and authoritative. "Excuse me, where do you think you are going?" Amara blinked in surprise, but maintained her composure. She gestured to her ID badge. "Good morning, officer. I am Judge Washington. I have court in 30 minutes." Patterson made no move to let her pass. Instead, he leaned forward to examine her ID with exaggerated scrutiny, his expression making it clear he was skeptical. "This could be fake. Anyone can print these things at home these days. Do you have any real identification?" The question caught Amara off guard. In 15 years, she had never once been asked to prove her identity beyond her courthouse credentials. She noticed a young Asian American man watching the interaction from nearby, his expression concerned. It was Jordan Chen, a new law clerk she had seen around the courthouse. "Officer, I am Judge Amara Washington. I preside in courtroom 416. You can check the directory or call court administration if you need verification." Patterson crossed his arms. "Maybe you are confused about where you need to be. The defendant waiting area is on the first floor." His tone was condescending, his implication crystal clear. Amara felt a flash of anger, but kept her voice level. "I am not confused, officer. I am the presiding judge in the Robinson case that starts in—" She checked her watch, 27 minutes. "I need to get to my chambers." A small crowd of courthouse employees had begun to gather, watching the interaction with varying expressions of confusion and concern. Patterson seemed to enjoy the audience. He keyed his radio. I might have a situation at the side entrance. Possible unauthorized entry attempt. Amara could hardly believe what was happening. This is ridiculous. Please call Judge Harrington or Court Security Director Marcus Thompson. They can verify who I am. Patterson ignored her suggestion. I am going to need you to step aside and empty your briefcase, ma'am. The way he emphasized ma'am dripped with disrespect. Amara stood her ground. I will do no such thing. This is completely inappropriate. I am a federal judge and I am late for court. Patterson moved closer, his hand shifting to rest near his weapon in a subtle but unmistakable threat. Either you comply or I will have to treat this as a security threat. Jordan Chen, the law clerk, had taken out his phone and appeared to be recording discreetly. Amara saw him from the corner of her eye, but did not acknowledge him, not wanting to draw Patterson's attention to the young man. Amara realized she had few options. The situation was escalating, and she needed to get to her courtroom. Reluctantly, she placed her briefcase on the small table beside the security checkpoint. Patterson roughly unzipped it and began pulling out files, letting several fall to the ground, where papers scattered in the light morning breeze. These could be anything, he muttered, rifling through her carefully organized case notes. Careful with those documents, Amara said, her patience wearing thin. Those are confidential court papers. Patterson looked up at her, a smirk forming on his lips. Anyone can print official-looking papers. He continued to empty her briefcase with deliberate carelessness. When he found nothing suspicious, his frustration seemed to grow. Instead of acknowledging his mistake, Patterson stepped closer. Turn around. The command hung in the air. Excuse me. Amara could not believe what she was hearing. I said turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Patterson pulled handcuffs from his belt. This is absolutely outrageous. Amara said, her voice finally rising. I am a federal judge. You have no grounds to detain me. Patterson stepped forward physically, turning her around, while several onlookers gasped. Interfering with security protocols, refusing to comply with officer commands, aggressive behavior. He listed off fabricated charges as he roughly placed the handcuffs on her wrists. The cold metal bit into Amara's skin as she stood in stunned disbelief on the courthouse steps, her papers still scattered around her feet. People she had worked with for years watched in shocked silence as Patterson leaned close to her ear and whispered words only she could hear. Your kind do not belong in that courtroom except in chains. The words burned like acid, confirming what Amara had suspected from the beginning. This was not about security. This was about putting a black woman in her place, about stripping her of her authority and dignity on the very steps of the institution she had sworn to serve. Marcus Thompson, the courthouse security director, came running from the main entrance, alerted by a frantic call from one of the regular security guards who had witnessed the confrontation from inside. Thompson, a tall black man with military bearing and 20 years of experience managing courthouse security, took in the scene with a mixture of shock and fury. His eyes widened at the sight of Judge Washington in handcuffs. What in God's name is going on here? Thompson demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathering crowd. Officer, release Judge Washington immediately. Patterson turned slowly, maintaining his grip on Amara's arm. This woman was attempting to enter a restricted area without proper identification. She became combative when questioned. Thompson's face darkened. That woman is Federal Judge Amara Washington. I have known her for 10 years. Release her now, or I will have your badge before lunch. The authority in Thompson's voice left no room for argument. Patterson hesitated, clearly weighing his options before reluctantly producing the key to the handcuffs. As he unlocked them, he maintained his defensive posture. She should have identified herself properly. I was just doing my job. She was uncooperative and aggressive. Each word was carefully chosen to justify his actions and shift blame to Amara. Amara rubbed her wrists where the handcuffs had left angry red marks. She maintained her composure with tremendous effort, aware that dozens of eyes were on her, including court staff who would be in her courtroom shortly. Thompson quickly assessed the situation. "Judge Washington, I cannot apologize enough for this inexcusable incident. We will deal with this immediately." Amara looked at her watch. The Robinson case would be called in 15 minutes. Dozens of people were waiting in her courtroom, including attorneys who had prepared for months, witnesses who had traveled from across the country, and members of the media covering this high-profile police brutality case. She had a split-second decision to make: demand immediate action against Patterson and risk delaying an already contentious trial, or proceed to her courtroom and address this outrage later. "I need to get to my courtroom, Marcus," she said quietly. "Please gather my documents and have them brought to chambers. We will address this incident after court today." Thompson nodded with understanding and respect. "Of course, Judge. I will personally see to it and will initiate an incident report immediately." As Amara walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, Patterson called after her, "Next time, wear your robe if you do not want to be questioned." She did not turn around, but the burning sensation of humiliation and rage threatened to overwhelm her. Thompson silenced Patterson with a glare and began issuing orders to his security team to collect the scattered documents. Once inside the building, Amara found a quiet corner in a stairwell and took several deep breaths, fighting back tears of anger and humiliation. She could not afford to show emotion now, not when she needed to present a facade of judicial detachment in minutes. When she reached her chambers, her judicial assistant Vanessa looked up in alarm. "Judge Washington, what happened? Court is about to start, and we just got a call that you were detained at security." Vanessa, who had worked with Amara for 8 years, could read the distress on her normally composed face. "I will explain later," Amara said quickly, donning her judicial robe. "Do we have all the files for the Robinson case?" Vanessa helped her organize the documents that had been hastily delivered by Thompson's security team. As she did, Amara had brief flashes of memory from other moments in her career when her authority had been questioned because of her race and gender. The law professor who had suggested she might be more comfortable in family law rather than constitutional law. The attorney who had addressed her as Miss throughout a trial despite repeated corrections. The defendant who had refused to accept her ruling, demanding a real judge. Each incident had strengthened her resolve, but this public humiliation felt different, more personal, more dangerous. A knock on her chamber door interrupted her thoughts. Chief Judge Robert Harrington entered without waiting for a response. At 65, Harrington was a politically conservative white man who had been on the bench for over 20 years. His relationship with Amara had always been professionally cordial, but distant. "Amara, I just heard about the incident. Are you all right?" His concern seemed genuine, but what followed revealed his true priorities. These things can spiral out of control if not handled discreetly. Perhaps it would be best to let courthouse security handle this internally. No need for unnecessary drama that could reflect poorly on the court. Amara looked at him steadily. "With all due respect, Judge Harrington, I was publicly humiliated and handcuffed on the steps of this courthouse while trying to do my job. That officer's behavior was not just unprofessional, it was discriminatory and possibly illegal. This cannot be swept under the rug." Harrington's expression tightened. "I understand you are upset, and rightly so. But consider the optics. You are presiding over a police brutality case. Any public confrontation with law enforcement right now could raise questions about your impartiality." The implication was clear: her pursuit of justice for herself could jeopardize her position on the bench. "I need to get to court," Amara said, effectively ending the conversation. "We can discuss this afterward." Harrington nodded, clearly relieved to postpone the discussion. "Of course, we will sort this out." After he left, Amara requested the security footage from the incident. Vanessa returned 30 minutes later while court was in recess with troubling news. "Security says the camera at that entrance was malfunctioning this morning. There is no footage available." The convenient timing was suspicious, to say the least. When court adjourned for the day, Amara found Jordan Chen waiting outside her chambers. The young law clerk looked nervous but determined. "Judge Washington, I saw what happened this morning," he said quietly when Vanessa showed him in. "That officer had no right to treat you that way. I recorded the incident on my phone. I thought you might need it." He held out his smartphone, showing her a video that captured most of the confrontation, including Patterson's deliberate humiliation tactics and the handcuffing. The final moments of the video clearly recorded Patterson's whispered comment about "your kind" belonging in chains. Amara felt a wave of emotion, grateful for this evidence, but devastated to have proof of what she had experienced. "Thank you, Jordan. This was brave of you." Jordan shuffled his feet. "I was scared to intervene. I should have done more." Amara shook her head. "You did exactly the right thing. This recording may be the only evidence of what actually happened." As Jordan left, Amara sat alone in her chambers, facing the most difficult decision of her career. She could file a formal complaint against Patterson, knowing it might trigger retaliation and potentially jeopardize her position on the Robinson case and her judicial career. Or she could remain silent, protecting her professional standing, but allowing Patterson's behavior to go unchallenged, potentially enabling similar treatment of others in the future. The weight of this choice pressed down on her as she stared at the video on her phone. Hearing again the officer's words, "Your kind do not belong in that courtroom except in chains." The words echoed through her mind, connecting to centuries of injustice she had spent her career fighting against. The decision crystallized this was not just about her dignity. It was about whether justice truly applied to everyone equally, even those tasked with upholding it. By the next morning, Judge Amara Washington awoke to a phone that would not stop ringing. Overnight, the video of her detainment had spread across every social media platform, igniting a firestorm of public reaction. Jordan Chen had not released the video himself, but his roommate had seen it while Jordan was reviewing the footage and, outraged by what he witnessed, shared it without permission. The damage was done. Millions of views, thousands of comments, hundreds of news outlets picking up the story. The headline practically wrote itself, "Black federal judge handcuffed at her own courthouse." Amara sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through the notifications flooding her phone. Calls from family members, text messages from colleagues, emails from journalists requesting interviews, and social media tags she never used. She felt simultaneously exposed and validated, her private humiliation now a public conversation about race authority and justice in America. Her son Thomas burst into her bedroom without knocking, his face contorted with anger and hurt. "Mom, have you seen this? It is all over Instagram and Twitter. How could they do this to you?" Thomas showed her his phone where the video was playing again, his hand shaking slightly. At 17, Thomas was navigating his own identity as a young black man in America. Seeing his accomplished mother handcuffed and humiliated struck a devastating blow to his sense of possibility and justice. Amara pulled him into a hug, feeling his body rigid with rage. "I am okay, Thomas. This is not going to break me." As she comforted her son, her phone rang again. This time it was her ex-husband Calvin, a corporate attorney whose concern was predictably tempered by practicality. "Amara, I just saw the video. This is outrageous, but you need to be careful about how visible you become in all this. Thomas has college applications out. This kind of attention could affect his prospects if admissions committees think he comes with controversy." His words stung with their implication that her pursuit of justice might harm their son's future. "So, I should just accept being handcuffed at my workplace because our son is applying to college?" The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Calvin sighed. "You know that is not what I meant. Just be strategic about this. You have a lot to lose." By the time Amara arrived at the courthouse, the atmosphere had transformed. News vans lined the street. Protesters gathered on the steps with signs reading, "Justice for Judge Washington," and "Black Robes Matter." Court security had established a perimeter, and Marcus Thompson personally escorted her through a side entrance to avoid the chaos. The courtroom where the Robinson police brutality case was being heard was filled beyond capacity. Every seat taken, people standing against the walls, media sketching furiously since cameras were not allowed. All eyes turned to Amara as she entered in her judicial robe, her face a careful mask of professional detachment despite the storm raging around her. Before she could call the court to order, a motion landed on her bench. The defense attorneys for the police officer on trial in the Robinson case had filed an emergency motion requesting her recusal, citing newly demonstrated bias against law enforcement, as evidenced by the public confrontation and subsequent media attention. Minutes later, her clerk delivered a note from Judge Harrington requesting her presence during the lunch recess. When she arrived at his chambers, Harrington was not alone. The court administrator and the head of the Judicial Ethics Committee sat with grim expressions. "Amara, in light of recent events, we believe it would be best if you voluntarily step down from the Robinson case," Harrington began without preamble. The motion for recusal raises valid concerns about the appearance of impartiality. Amara felt the blood rush to her face. "You cannot be serious. I was the victim of discriminatory treatment by an officer. How does that create bias on my part?" The Ethics Committee representative, Judge Eleanor Patel, cleared her throat. "It is not about actual bias, Amara. It is about the appearance of bias. This case involves allegations of police misconduct. You are now involved in your own dispute with law enforcement." Amara stood her ground. By that logic, any time a judge is mistreated by someone connected to a case, they would have to recuse. That creates a perverse incentive for misconduct as a legal strategy. The conversation grew increasingly tense, but Amara refused to voluntarily step down. As she left Harrington's chambers, her clerk intercepted her with more troubling news. "Judge, there is something you should know about Officer Patterson. He previously served in the same precinct as the defendant in your case, Officer Michael Brennan. They worked together for 3 years." The connection was too convenient to be coincidental. Later that afternoon, Amara learned that Patterson had been placed on administrative leave with pay pending an investigation, a slap on the wrist that only fueled public outrage. Her email inbox filled with both support messages and death threats requiring court security to implement additional measures for her protection. The police union released a statement defending Patterson, suggesting that, "In these dangerous times, officers must remain vigilant even when those seeking entry to secure facilities claim positions of authority." The statement subtly questioned why Amara had not been wearing her judicial robe and implied she had been confrontational when asked for identification. As the day ended, Valencia Torres, a civil rights attorney and Amara's former law school classmate, called with information that changed everything. "Amara, I have been doing some digging. Patterson has a history of similar incidents. There are at least 6 formal complaints in his personnel file from minorities who were subjected to excessive scrutiny or detention at security checkpoints. All the complaints were buried or dismissed." Amara's suspicions were confirmed. This was not an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior that had been protected and enabled by the system. The personal had become political, and there was no going back. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination that made your blood boil? Comment. Number 1. If you believe Officer Patterson should be fired immediately for his actions against Judge Washington. Comment number 2. If you think the entire courthouse security system needs an overhaul to prevent such incidents. Give this video a thumbs up if you admire Judge Washington's composure in the face of such blatant disrespect. Subscribe to follow this incredible story of justice and resilience. What would you do if you were in Judge Washington's position? Would you fight the system or protect your career? The answers might not be as simple as they seem, as we will see in the next part of this extraordinary journey. 3 days after the incident, Amara sat in the small downtown office of Valencia Torres, surrounded by case files and civil rights posters that covered nearly every inch of wall space. Valencia, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp features, placed a legal pad between them. "We need to approach this methodically, Amara. This is not just about filing a complaint against Patterson. We need to expose the entire system that protected him and others like him." Valencia had built her reputation taking on police misconduct cases, often at great personal cost. She and Amara had been close in law school before their careers took them in different directions. Now those paths converged again under circumstances neither would have chosen. Amara nodded, still processing the events of the past few days. "Internal Affairs contacted me this morning. They want me to come in for an interview tomorrow." Valencia's expression hardened. "Not without me present. Those interviews are designed to intimidate complainants and protect officers. They will try to make this about you, question your behavior, suggest you overreacted." Her prediction proved accurate. The next day, in a sterile interview room at police headquarters, 2 internal affairs investigators, both white men in their 50s, spent more time questioning Amara about her confrontational attitude than Patterson's conduct. "Judge Washington, did you immediately identify yourself as a federal judge when approached by Officer Patterson?" The lead investigator asked, his tone suggesting the answer was obviously no. "My courthouse ID was clearly visible on my lanyard," Amara replied calmly, "and I verbally identified myself multiple times." "But you were not wearing your judicial robe," the second investigator noted, as if this justified handcuffing her. Valencia interrupted. "Gentlemen, are you suggesting judges must wear robes at all times in the courthouse, even when walking to their chambers? Is that written policy?" The investigators shifted uncomfortably, but continued their line of questioning, clearly trying to establish that Amara had somehow contributed to the situation. When they asked if she would be willing to accept an apology from Patterson and move forward for the good of community relations, Valencia cut the interview short. As they left police headquarters, a young woman approached them cautiously in the parking lot. "Judge Washington, my name is Rebecca Kim. I am a journalist with the Cleveland Tribune. I have been investigating Officer Patterson for months." Rebecca looked over her shoulder nervously before continuing. "There are others, Judge Washington, other minorities who have experienced similar treatment from Patterson. They are afraid to come forward, but if someone like you takes a stand, that might change." Rebecca handed Amara a thumb drive. "This contains interviews I have conducted confidentially. These people have not filed formal complaints because they do not believe they will be taken seriously. But they might speak to you." Over the next week, Amara met privately with 3 of Patterson's previous victims. Dr. James Carter, a respected cardiologist who had been detained while trying to enter the hospital during an emergency because Patterson, working security during a public event, did not believe he was a doctor. Professor Miguel Rodriguez, who had been aggressively questioned and searched while entering an academic conference where he was the keynote speaker. And Jamal Williams, a 16-year-old honor student who had been handcuffed at a science competition when Patterson, working off-duty security, claimed the boy matched the description of someone causing trouble. Each story followed the same pattern: a person of color in a position of authority or achievement subjected to humiliating treatment and disbelief when they asserted their identity or purpose. And in each case, complaints had been filed and subsequently dismissed or buried. While Amara gathered testimonies, Valencia worked her contacts in the police department. An anonymous source provided her with Patterson's complete personnel file, revealing not just the complaints, but the pattern of protection he had received. Supervisors had repeatedly intervened to prevent disciplinary action. Performance reviews had been altered to remove negative incidents. Witnesses had been pressured to withdraw statements. The corruption was systemic and deeply entrenched. As public interest in the case grew, so did the backlash. Supporters of Patterson began digging into Amara's judicial record, looking for cases where they could claim she had shown bias against law enforcement. Conservative media outlets ran segments questioning her qualifications and suggesting she had played the race card to advance her career. One evening, as Thomas arrived home from basketball practice, he mentioned casually, That car has been following me for 3 days. Amara froze. What car? Thomas described an unmarked sedan with tinted windows that had been parked near his school and had followed him home on multiple occasions. Amara immediately called Marcus Thompson, who promised to look into it, but warned her that his authority extended only to courthouse security. The next day, Judge Harrington called Amara into his office again. His usual political smoothness had been replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Amara, I need to speak frankly. There are powerful people who want this situation to go away, people with influence over judicial appointments and assignments. His meaning was clear. Her career advancement was in jeopardy. Are you threatening me, Robert? Amara asked quietly. Harrington looked genuinely shocked. No, I am trying to protect you. These people play hardball. I have heard rumors they are building a case against you, looking for any misstep in your judicial record. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Valencia. Call me immediately. Patterson not acting alone. Evidence of organized targeting of minorities at Courthouse. The pieces were coming together, revealing a picture far more disturbing than one racist officer. This was systematic organized discrimination that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and possibly the judicial system itself. That night, as Amara reviewed case files in her home office, the doorbell rang. No one was there when she answered, but a manila envelope lay on her porch. Inside were photographs of her at the grocery store, walking to her car at the courthouse, and having dinner with Thomas at his favorite restaurant. The message was clear: she was being watched. The next morning, she received an anonymous email containing a single line, "Drop the complaint, or next time we will do more than take pictures." The intimidation tactics only strengthened her resolve. She would not be silenced, not when the system itself was so clearly broken. As she placed the photographs in an evidence bag for Valencia, Amara remembered the words her grandmother, who had marched with Dr. King, had told her when she first became a judge. Baby wearing that robe does not protect you from the world's ugliness. It just gives you the power to do something about it. Now it was time to use that power, no matter the personal cost. What had begun as a personal humiliation for Judge Amara Washington had morphed into a national referendum on race authority and justice in America. Major news networks ran special segments on the judge and the officer. Social media hashtags proliferated. Justice for Tar. Judge Washington stand with Patterson Black Robes Matter. Public opinion divided predictably along racial and political lines, with polls showing stark differences in how Americans perceived the incident. Amara tried to maintain her normal routine, continuing to hear cases and fulfill her judicial responsibilities despite the storm swirling around her. But normalcy was impossible. Conservative news outlet Heartland News ran a 30-minute special titled "Activist Judge or Victim." The program featured carefully selected cases from Amara's judicial history that allegedly showed bias against law enforcement, conveniently omitting the numerous cases where she had ruled in favor of police officers when the evidence supported their actions. The courthouse itself became a battleground of silent judgments and shifting allegiances. Some staff went out of their way to express support, bringing coffee to her chambers or offering encouraging words in hallways. Others avoided eye contact, their silence communicating volumes about where they stood. The divide was painful to witness in an institution dedicated to impartial justice. Officer Patterson made his first public appearance since the incident on a friendly morning show. Dressed in a crisp uniform with his family beside him, he offered what was clearly a carefully choreographed apology. "I want to apologize to Judge Washington for any distress my actions may have caused. In these dangerous times, officers must remain vigilant, and unfortunately, misunderstandings can occur." If Judge Washington had more clearly identified herself or been wearing her judicial robe as is customary, this unfortunate incident could have been avoided. "Did you do body?" The non-apology infuriated Amara, but Valencia advised her against responding publicly. "They are trying to provoke you into saying something they can use against you. We fight this in the proper forums, with evidence, not emotions." That evening, Amara and Thomas sat at their dining table, take-out containers between them, since neither had the energy to cook. Thomas pushed his food around his plate, unusually quiet. "What is it?" Amara asked, recognizing the signs of something troubling her son. Thomas put down his fork. "I got into a fight at school today." Amara straightened in her chair. Thomas had never been in a fight before. "What happened?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Kevin Bradshaw was showing everyone the video of you being handcuffed and saying you probably deserved it, because black judges only get appointed because of affirmative action, not because they are qualified." His voice cracked slightly. "I told him to shut up, and when he did not, I pushed him. He swung at me, and then, well, you know." Amara reached across the table and took her son's hand. "Thomas, I appreciate you defending me, but fighting is not the answer. We cannot allow them to provoke us into actions that hurt ourselves." Thomas pulled his hand away. "So we just take it, like you took it when that officer put handcuffs on you. Sometimes you have to fight back, Mom." His words hit hard, touching on Amara's own internal struggle between maintaining her judicial temperament and standing up against injustice. Before she could respond, her phone rang. It was her judicial assistant, Vanessa, calling with alarming news. "Judge Washington, the Judicial Conduct Committee has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow regarding your alleged violation of judicial neutrality by pursuing a complaint against Officer Patterson." The committee, led by Judge Frederick Winters, a close ally of Harrington, had the power to recommend sanctions against judges, including temporary suspension from the bench. Valencia worked through the night preparing for the hearing, but both women knew they faced an uphill battle in a system designed to protect its own. The hearing room was small and austere, with the 7-member committee seated behind an imposing table. Judge Winters opened with a stern reminder that judges must remain above public controversies and maintain neutrality in all matters, especially those involving potential litigants like law enforcement. Harrington testified, expressing deep concern that Amara's public dispute with Patterson had created an appearance of bias that could undermine public confidence in the judiciary. His words were measured and reasonable on the surface, but Amara recognized the subtext. She was making waves in a system that valued calm waters above justice. When it was her turn to speak, Amara addressed the committee with the same measured tone she used in her courtroom. "I stand before you not as an activist or an aggrieved individual, but as a judge who believes that our system must apply equally to everyone. If we cannot uphold the dignity and rights of those who serve justice, how can we claim to deliver justice to others?" The committee deliberated for less than an hour before issuing their decision. While they would not formally sanction Amara, they strongly recommended she recuse herself from any cases involving law enforcement while her complaint against Patterson was pending, effectively removing her from a significant portion of her docket, including the high-profile Robinson case. As Amara and Valencia left the hearing, they huddled in a quiet corner of the courthouse to regroup. "This is a setback, but not the end," Valencia assured her. "I have been doing more digging, and I have found something significant. Patterson has connections to Judge Harrington beyond what we initially thought. They both belong to the same private club, and Harrington's son-in-law works in the same precinct where Patterson started his career." Before they could discuss further, Marcus Thompson approached with a grim expression. "Judge Washington, there has been an incident at your home." Amara's heart raced as she called Thomas relieved when he answered immediately to confirm he was safe at a friend's house. But the damage to their home was considerable. Spray painted across her garage door in bold red letters were the words, "Race traitor," and "Go back to where you came from." The police response was notably slow, taking over an hour to arrive, despite the home of a federal judge being vandalized with threatening messages. The investigating officers took minimal notes and suggested it was probably just kids playing pranks, despite the clearly targeted nature of the attack. As Amara stood in her driveway watching the half-hearted investigation, her phone buzzed with messages of support from an unexpected source. Judges across the country, particularly minority judges, had formed an impromptu network to support her. Many shared their own stories of discrimination and disrespect, experiences they had never formally reported for fear of the very backlash Amara was now experiencing. Their solidarity provided comfort, but also highlighted how pervasive the problem was in the justice system. Later that evening, as Amara and Thomas temporarily relocated to a hotel for safety, she received a call from the governor's office. The governor himself came on the line, his voice carefully diplomatic. "Judge Washington, I want to express my concern about the vandalism of your home. Such actions have no place in our state." Before Amara could thank him, he continued, "However, I also want to emphasize the importance of supporting our police officers during these difficult times. Public safety depends on respect for law enforcement." The message was clear. The political establishment was closing ranks around Patterson and the system he represented. As she hung up, an email arrived from an anonymous address. The subject line read simply, "Final warning." The message contained a single sentence: "We have evidence of judicial misconduct that will end your career unless you drop everything now." Attached was a document that appeared to be a draft news story detailing allegations that Amara had accepted bribes to rule favorably in a case 5 years earlier. The allegations were completely fabricated, but crafted to seem plausible with doctored financial records and quotes from anonymous sources close to the judge. The intimidation had escalated from surveillance to direct threats against her professional reputation and legacy. Amara forwarded the email to Valencia with a short message: "They are getting desperate. We must be getting close to something important." Valencia's response came minutes later: "Be careful, Amara, but do not back down. Truth is on our side, and the truth always finds a way out, no matter how hard they try to bury it." The official letter arrived by courier early Monday morning, the Judicial Committee's seal prominent in the upper corner. Judge Amara Washington was temporarily suspended from the bench pending a full investigation into her conduct. The stated reason was concerns about judicial temperament and neutrality, but the timing made the true motivation transparent. By pursuing justice for herself and others victimized by Patterson, she had threatened the system's comfortable status quo. Now that system was fighting back with every weapon at its disposal. Amara sat in her living room, the letter in her hands, feeling a complex mixture of emotions: anger at the injustice, fear for her career and her son's well-being. But beneath those immediate reactions was a deeper, more troubling realization: if this could happen to her, a federal judge with resources and public visibility, what chance did ordinary citizens have against institutional discrimination? Valencia arrived an hour later, already formulating their response to the suspension. But before they could discuss strategy, Rebecca Kim called with news that shifted the landscape yet again. "Judge Washington, I have been fired," the young journalist said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Azur. My editor killed my investigation into Patterson and the department. When I threatened to take it elsewhere, they terminated me for insubordination and failure to maintain journalistic standards." Before Amara could express her sympathy, Rebecca continued, "But I kept copies of everything, and I found something you need to see. Patterson and several other officers have been systematically tampering with evidence in cases involving minority defendants. They call it insurance, making sure the right people get convicted regardless of actual evidence. This revelation expanded the scope of corruption far beyond what they had initially suspected. It wasn't just about discrimination at security checkpoints or harassment of minorities in positions of authority. It was about actively manipulating the justice system to target people of color. Amara and Valencia were still processing this information when Amara's phone rang again. It was Marcus Thompson, his voice uncharacteristically shaken. Judge Washington, your son has been arrested." The world seemed to stop for a moment as Amara processed his words. What, when, why? Marcus spoke rapidly, sharing what little he knew. Thomas had been pulled over for allegedly running a stop sign while driving home from his friend's house. Officers claimed they found marijuana in the car and arrested him for possession. Amara knew immediately this was no coincidence. Thomas did not use drugs and was meticulously careful about obeying traffic laws, especially since getting his license. This was retaliation pure and simple, using her son to get to her. Valencia immediately went into action, calling contacts in the department and the prosecutor's office. Amara raced to the precinct where Thomas was being held, her heart pounding with fear and rage. When she arrived, they made her wait 2 hours before allowing her to see her son, an unusually long time for a minor arrested for a first offense. When Thomas was finally brought to the interview room, Amara gasped at the sight of a bruise forming on his cheekbone. "What happened to your face?" she demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. Thomas's eyes were hard angry. "I resisted by asking why I was being arrested," he said bitterly. "Officer Keene said I needed to learn respect for law enforcement." Officer Keene. Amara recognized the name from Valencia's investigation. One of Patterson's close associates in the department. The connection was unmistakable. Valencia arrived shortly after with a court order for Thomas's immediate release, signed by a judge who owed her a favor. As they left the precinct, Thomas was uncharacteristically quiet, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a wary vigilance that broke Amara's heart. This was the moment every black parent dreaded when their child's innocence collided with the harsh reality of systemic racism. Back at home, Valencia did not mince words. "They are trying to force you to drop the case by targeting Thomas. This is classic intimidation tactics." Amara paced the living room, torn between her commitment to justice and her duty to protect her son. Maybe Calvin was right. Maybe the cost is too high. Valencia placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. "That is what they want you to think. That is how they maintain the system, by making the cost of challenging it seem too great." Before Amara could respond, Valencia's phone rang. On the other end was a potential breakthrough. A white female police officer named Sarah Daniels had reached out claiming she had witnessed Patterson's misconduct firsthand and had documentation to prove the systemic nature of the discrimination. Officer Daniels agreed to meet them the following day at Valencia's office to provide her statement and evidence. Her testimony could be the key to breaking the case wide open. A police officer crossing the thin blue line to expose corruption would be much harder to dismiss or discredit. But when the appointed meeting time arrived, Sarah Daniels did not appear. Calls to her cell phone went straight to voicemail. By evening, Valencia's contacts confirmed the troubling truth. Officer Daniels had taken an unexpected leave of absence and appeared to have left town. A welfare check at her apartment found it empty with signs of a hasty departure. "They got to her, Valencia concluded grimly. "Threatened her or worse." The pattern was clear now. Anyone who attempted to help Amara or expose the truth faced swift retaliation. The system was closing ranks, protecting its own at all costs. Then came the final blow. A package arrived at Amara's home by courier with no return address. Inside were doctored photographs and fabricated documents designed to suggest she had accepted bribes, engaged in an inappropriate relationship with an attorney who appeared before her court, and leaked confidential case information to the press. A note attached read simply, "The media receives these tomorrow unless you withdraw all complaints and resign quietly." The evidence was clearly fabricated, but constructed skillfully enough that refuting it would require time and resources. By then the damage to her reputation would be done. Even if eventually cleared, the cloud of suspicion would hang over her career permanently. Sitting at her kitchen table, the manufactured evidence spread before her. Amara reached her breaking point. Tears she had held back for weeks finally spilled over as the full weight of what she was up against pressed down on her. The system she had dedicated her life to upholding was revealed to be fundamentally corrupted, protecting the powerful at the expense of justice. For a brief, dark moment she considered giving in, withdrawing her complaints, accepting a quiet retirement from the bench, protecting Thomas from further targeting. But as the moment passed, another emotion replaced her despair determination. If they were willing to go to such lengths to silence her, it meant she was close to exposing something they desperately wanted to keep hidden, and she would not give them the satisfaction of breaking her. Have you ever faced a situation where it seemed like the entire system was against you? Comment number 1. If you believe Judge Washington should continue fighting despite the risks to her career and family. Comment number 2. If you think the targeting of her son crossed a line that cannot be tolerated. Hit that like button if you admire her resilience in the face of such coordinated intimidation. And subscribe to see how Judge Washington turns the tables on those trying to silence her. What would you do if you discovered corruption in a system you believed in? Would you risk everything to expose the truth? The answer might be more complicated than you think, as Judge Washington is about to demonstrate in the most powerful way possible. The morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the darkness Amara had been fighting. She stood before her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with new resolve. They had pushed her to the edge, hoping she would retreat. Instead, she would take a leap forward. Valencia arrived early, surprised to find Amara calmly drinking coffee in her kitchen, a sense of purpose radiating from her that had been absent in recent days. "I have made a decision," Amara announced without preamble. "We are going public with everything. The fabricated evidence, the threats, Thomas's arrest, all of it. No more playing defense." Valencia's eyes widened. "Amara, are you sure?" "Once we do this, there is no going back. Your judicial career may never recover." Amara nodded. "I became a judge to uphold justice, not my own position. What good is a robe if I cannot use it to protect those who need protection, including myself and my son?" The plan came together quickly. Valencia arranged a press conference on the courthouse steps, the symbolism of the location not lost on anyone. They contacted every victim of Patterson they had identified, inviting them to stand with Amara. Rebecca Kim would cover the story independently, having secured a position with an online news outlet known for investigative journalism. By noon, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Amara stood at the microphone, Thomas slightly behind her, his presence a silent testimony to how personal this fight had become. Dr. Carter, Professor Rodriguez-Young, Jamal Williams, and other victims of Patterson's discrimination flanked them in a powerful visual statement of solidarity. Amara spoke without notes, her voice clear and unwavering. "I stand before you today not just as Judge Amara Washington, but as a citizen who believes in the promise of equal justice under law. What began as a personal humiliation has revealed a systemic problem that affects us all regardless of our position or authority." She methodically laid out the evidence they had gathered. Patterson's history of targeting minorities, the department's pattern of burying complaints, the apparent connections between Patterson and the defendants in her police brutality case, the fabricated evidence used to threaten her, and the retaliatory arrest of her son. She held up the envelope containing the doctored photos and documents. This is what power does when it feels threatened by truth. It fabricates, intimidates, and retaliates. But truth cannot be permanently suppressed, no matter how uncomfortable it makes those in authority. As she spoke, Dr. Carter stepped forward to share his experience of being detained while responding to a medical emergency. Professor Rodriguez described the humiliation of being searched in front of colleagues. Jamal Williams, the youngest victim, spoke of how his detention had affected his sense of belonging in academic spaces. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern that could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. The press conference was being broadcast live on local stations and streamed nationally. Comments flooded social media platforms as viewers responded to the powerful testimonies. Within hours, the narrative had shifted dramatically. What had been portrayed in some circles as an overreaction by a single judge was now revealed as evidence of systemic discrimination that affected countless individuals. The response from authorities was swift but divided. The police department issued a statement reasserting their commitment to thorough and impartial investigation of all complaints, while neither confirming nor denying the specific allegations. The courthouse administration remained conspicuously silent. By evening, a new development had emerged. Sarah Daniels, the police officer who had disappeared before their scheduled meeting, resurfaced with a bombshell revelation. She had not fled out of fear, but had gone into hiding to secure evidence before it could be destroyed. Now, with the protection of a prominent civil rights organization, she came forward with documentation showing that Patterson and several other officers had specifically targeted minorities at security checkpoints, maintaining an unofficial quota system for searches and detentions. More significantly, she revealed that Patterson's assignment to the courthouse entrance on the day of Amara's detention had not been coincidental. He had deliberately switched shifts to be positioned there, knowing she would be arriving to preside over the police brutality case. The implication was clear. Patterson's actions were not random bias, but a calculated attempt to intimidate or discredit the judge presiding over a case that could have significant consequences for the department. As Officer Daniels' testimony spread, the FBI announced they were opening an investigation into the police department for potential civil rights violations. Internal Affairs, which had dragged its feet on Amara's complaint, suddenly found new urgency in reviewing Patterson's conduct and history. Valencia wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. She filed a class action lawsuit against the police department on behalf of all identified victims of discriminatory treatment. The lawsuit named not just Patterson, but supervisors who had enabled his behavior and department policies that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. 3 days after the press conference, another whistleblower emerged from an unexpected quarter. A technician from the police IT department provided records showing that Patterson and certain other officers had run background checks on minorities at rates vastly disproportionate to white individuals encountered at security checkpoints. The data created a damning statistical pattern that could not be explained away as coincidence or proper security protocol. Public opinion continued to shift as more evidence emerged. Judge Harrington, sensing the changing tide, attempted to distance himself from the controversy by issuing a statement supporting a full and impartial investigation into all allegations. Other judges who had previously remained silent began to publicly support Amara, including several white judges whose voices carried particular weight in conservative circles. The governor, who had initially urged support for law enforcement, established a special commission to investigate police conduct throughout the state, appointing respected civil rights leaders and law enforcement reformers to lead the effort. Patterson himself was suspended without pay as evidence against him had mounted a significant escalation from his initial paid administrative leave. His police union, which had vigorously defended him initially, grew noticeably quieter as the extent of the evidence became clear. For the first time since the ordeal began, Amara felt the tide turning. The system that had closed ranks against her was beginning to fracture under the weight of accumulated evidence and public scrutiny. But as she returned home from a meeting with Valencia and their growing legal team, a text message from an unknown number appeared on her phone. "This is not over. You have no idea who you are really fighting." The warning was a stark reminder that despite their progress, powerful interests remained invested in maintaining the status quo. Systems of discrimination were not dismantled easily, and those who benefited from them would not surrender without a fight. But Amara was no longer fighting alone. A coalition had formed around her victims, witnesses, journalists, attorneys, and reform-minded officials who recognized that her case represented a critical opportunity to address long-standing injustices. As she deleted the threatening message, Amara felt something she had not experienced in weeks: hope. Not just for her own vindication, but for the possibility of meaningful change in a system that had failed too many for too long. The FBI agents arrived at the courthouse early on a Monday morning, their presence sending immediate ripples through the building. They came not for Patterson, whose case was already proceeding through internal and external investigations, but for records related to Judge Robert Harrington and the courthouse administration. Their warrant specifically requested communications regarding security protocols, officer assignments, and handling of discrimination complaints over the past 5 years. The federal investigation had expanded beyond the police department to include the judicial system itself, suggesting connections and collusion that crossed institutional boundaries. Amara, reinstated to the bench following a review by a state judicial panel that found no basis for her suspension, watched these developments with a complex mixture of vindication and concern. The system she had dedicated her career to was revealing deep flaws that would require painful reconstruction. The morning she returned to her courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Some court staff welcomed her warmly with sincere apologies for not speaking up sooner. Others maintained a cool professionalism that betrayed their discomfort with her role in disrupting institutional norms. The attorney's witnesses and defendants who appeared before her seemed acutely aware they were in the presence of someone who had become a reluctant symbol of resistance against systemic discrimination. Amara maintained her judicial demeanor, treating everyone with the same fairness and respect she always had, though she noticed subtle changes in how people responded to her authority. There was a new awareness that behind the robe sat a human being who had been handcuffed on these very courthouse steps because of the color of her skin. 2 days after her return, Officer Sarah Daniels testified before a grand jury about the department's practices. Her testimony, parts of which were later made public, painted a disturbing picture of systematic targeting of minorities that extended well beyond Patterson. There was an unofficial but clearly understood policy, Daniels testified. Certain types of people received extra scrutiny, additional questions, more frequent searches. It was never written down, but it was reinforced through assignments, promotions, and social approval within the department. Daniels revealed that officers who questioned these practices faced isolation, undesirable assignments, and lack of backup in dangerous situations. The bold's thin blue line was particularly impenetrable when it came to issues of race and discriminatory practices. Documents subpoenaed from the department supported Daniels' testimony. Performance reviews showed that Patterson had been promoted despite multiple complaints because, in the words of one supervisor, he maintains effective security presence and ensures undesirable elements are properly screened. The euphemisms barely disguised the underlying bias that had been institutionally rewarded. Judge Harrington was forced to recuse himself from all cases involving police misconduct and faced an ethics investigation of his own. Internal communications revealed he had specifically intervened to protect officers like Patterson from formal complaints, including redirecting several discrimination claims to administrative channels where they could be quietly dismissed. Thomas, processing his own traumatic experience with law enforcement, found an unexpected outlet for his anger and pain. With Amara's blessing, he began speaking at youth forums about standing up against discrimination, sharing his perspective as both the son of a judge and a young black man who had been targeted by police. His articulate, thoughtful presentations resonated with young people struggling to reconcile American ideals of justice with their lived experiences. Meanwhile, the police brutality case that had been in Amara's courtroom on the day of her detention proceeded under her authority, the defense's motions for her recusal having been denied by the Judicial Review Panel. The evidence of a targeted campaign to remove her from the case only strengthened the argument for her continued oversight, as recusal would have rewarded the very misconduct at issue. As the weeks passed, a complex conspiracy began to unfold through testimony documents and whistleblower accounts. Patterson had not acted alone or on mere personal bias when he detained Amara. He had been deliberately assigned to harass her as part of a coordinated effort to force her off the police brutality case, which involved officers from the same precinct where he had begun his career. The connections extended to Judge Harrington, whose son-in-law served in that precinct, and to the police chief who had personally approved the security rotation that placed Patterson at the courthouse entrance that morning. The web of relationships and deliberate actions revealed not just individual bias, but institutional corruption designed to protect certain officers from accountability. The police chief resigned as evidence of his knowledge and approval of discriminatory practices became public. His departure was followed by several high-ranking officers who had been implicated in either direct participation or deliberate blindness to discrimination within their commands. Patterson himself attempted to negotiate immunity by offering information on higher-ranking officials involved in the conspiracy. His offer sparked a race among implicated officers to cooperate with investigators, each trying to secure the best deal for themselves as the unified front crumbled. Valencia's class action lawsuit gained additional plaintiffs as more victims came forward, emboldened by the public support for Amara and other early witnesses. The lawsuit now included over 40 individuals who had experienced similar treatment, creating a pattern so extensive it could not be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. During a pre-trial hearing in the lawsuit, Patterson made a critical mistake. Frustrated by questions about his conduct and clearly unaccustomed to being held accountable, he lost his temper and directly threatened Amara. "You think you have won, but people like you never really win in this system," he snarled, half rising from his seat before his attorney could restrain him. "You should watch your back, Judge." The outburst occurred in open court, witnessed by dozens and recorded by the court reporter. Any remaining sympathy for Patterson evaporated with his threatening behavior toward a federal judge. Even his most loyal supporters in the department distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with such explicit intimidation. The grand jury's decision came 7 months after Amara's detention on the courthouse steps. They voted to indict Patterson and 6 other officers for civil rights violations, conspiracy evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. 4 supervisors, including a deputy chief, were indicted for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The indictments represented the most significant police accountability action in the city's history. As Amara reviewed the indictment documents in her chambers, she reflected on the personal cost of the past months. Her reputation had been attacked. Her son traumatized her home, vandalized her privacy, invaded. She had faced threats, fabricated evidence, and institutional betrayal from a system she had served faithfully. Yet she had also discovered allies in unexpected places and witnessed courage from ordinary people willing to stand against injustice despite personal risk. The pain had been profound, but so had the revelations of strength and solidarity that emerged from it. The system had not broken her. Instead, she had exposed critical fractures in the system itself, creating an opportunity for genuine reform. As she prepared to leave for the day, a final piece of evidence arrived from Valencia, who had continued investigating connections between Patterson, the police department, and courthouse administration. Phone records showed calls between Patterson and Judge Harrington the day before and the morning of Amara's detention, directly contradicting Harrington's claims that he had no prior knowledge of the incident. The evidence would be presented to the Judicial Ethics Committee the following week, likely ending Harrington's career and possibly resulting in criminal charges of his own. Justice was slow and imperfect, but it was coming step by painful step. And Amara Washington, despite everything they had tried to take from her, remained on the bench more determined than ever to ensure that justice applied equally to everyone, regardless of their position or power. 1 year after the day, Officer Patterson placed handcuffs on Judge Amara Washington. The same courthouse steps hosted a very different scene. A podium draped with the state seal stood where Amara had been detained, surrounded by a diverse gathering of officials, community leaders, and citizens. Judge Washington, elegant in a deep purple suit that contrasted with the somber black robes she wore in court, approached the microphone to address the assembled crowd and media. Today, we establish the Sarah Daniels Police Oversight Commission, named for the officer whose courage broke through the wall of silence and changed our system for the better. Amara began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. This commission will ensure that what happened to me and countless others cannot happen again without swift and certain accountability. The past year had brought sweeping changes, though not without resistance and setbacks. Patterson had gone to trial for multiple civil rights violations, ultimately receiving a 10-year sentence that reflected both the severity of his actions and his position of authority. 5 other officers received lesser sentences after cooperating with prosecutors. Amara had testified at Patterson's trial, recounting in measured tones the humiliation and fear she had experienced. Her testimony was powerful precisely because of her restraint, her continued faith in the possibility of justice, despite her personal experience of its failure. The courthouse had implemented new security procedures and mandatory bias training developed with input from Amara and other victims of discrimination. Every security checkpoint now featured prominently displayed identification procedures and complaint protocols with direct reporting lines to independent oversight bodies rather than internal affairs. Cameras monitored all entrances with footage automatically preserved for at least 90 days. Thomas had graduated high school with honors and been accepted to Harvard Law School, inspired by his mother's fight and determined to continue the work of reforming the justice system from within. In his application essay, which he had shown Amara with pride, he wrote, "I have seen both the failure and the promise of American justice through my mother's experience. I choose to believe in and work toward its promise while never forgetting or accepting its failures." Judge Harrington had retired in disgrace after the full extent of his protection of corrupt officers was revealed. His intervention had gone far beyond Amara's case, extending to dozens of complaints that had been buried or dismissed through his influence. The investigation revealed he had received benefits from the police union for years, including vacations, home renovations, and college tuition assistance for his children, all carefully disguised as legitimate transactions. Valencia's class action lawsuit had resulted in a $27 million settlement for victims of discriminatory treatment, with funds earmarked not just for compensation, but for community programs addressing systemic racism and police reform. The settlement included mandatory policy changes and independent monitoring of department practices for a minimum of 10 years. Rebecca Kim, whose journalism had helped expose the conspiracy, despite her firing from the traditional news outlet, received a prestigious award for investigative reporting. Her detailed series on discrimination in law enforcement had been syndicated nationally, bringing attention to similar issues in departments across the country. Amara had established a mentorship program for minority law students facing discrimination, creating a support network that extended beyond her local jurisdiction. The program paired students with judges and senior attorneys who could provide both practical guidance and emotional support in navigating a system that still contained significant barriers. As Amara continued her address at the commission inauguration, she acknowledged the complex reality behind their progress. "We cannot claim that discrimination has been eliminated from our justice system. What we can say is that it now faces real consequences and genuine oversight. The work continues, but today we have better tools to do that work effectively." The ceremony concluded with the introduction of the commission members, a diverse group that included former officers, civil rights attorneys, community activists, and judicial representatives. Their first task would be establishing reporting procedures and investigative protocols that would apply equally to everyone in the system, regardless of rank or position. As the formal proceedings ended and attendees mingled, Sarah Daniels approached Amara. The former officer had become an influential advocate for police reform, testifying before state legislatures and consulting with departments nationwide on addressing systemic bias. "I never expected to have a commission named after me," Daniels said with a self-deprecating smile. "Especially not one that oversees police conduct." Amara clasped her hand warmly. Names matter. Symbols matter. Having a white female officer as the symbol of this commission sends an important message about who police accountability serves and who should participate in creating it. As they spoke, Marcus Thompson joined them, now heading the expanded and empowered Courthouse Security Division. "Judge Washington, there is something you should know," he said quietly. The anonymous package that helped break the case wide open, the one with Patterson's personnel records and the communications between him and Harrington, we finally confirmed the source. He glanced around before continuing. It came from within the police department itself, a group of officers who were tired of the corruption and discrimination but feared coming forward individually. They called themselves the Justice League. Amara laughed at the name, but the revelation touched her deeply. Even at the darkest moments, allies had existed within the very system that seemed most opposed to her. That knowledge reinforced her belief that institutional change was possible, not just through outside pressure, but through the conscience and courage of those within. As the crowd dispersed, Amara found herself alone on the courthouse steps. For a moment, standing exactly where Patterson had handcuffed her a year earlier. The memory would always be painful, but it no longer held power over her. She ascended the steps with her head high, ready to take the bench for afternoon hearings. A new security team led by Marcus Thompson and reflecting the diversity of the community they served flanked her as she entered the building. The system was not perfect. True justice remained an aspiration rather than a consistent reality. But tangible progress had been made, progress that would affect thousands of lives beyond her own, and Judge Amara Washington remained in position to continue that work. One case, one decision, one principle at a time. What would you do if you witnessed injustice in a system you believe in? Would you have the courage to stand up like Judge Washington, even when facing enormous personal and professional risks? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that explores the difficult realities and possibilities of justice in America. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how discrimination persists even in our most respected institutions, and comment below with your thoughts on what true accountability in our justice system would look like. Thank you for joining me for this incredible journey from injustice to transformation. Remember, change begins when brave individuals refuse to accept the unacceptable, even when it would be easier to remain silent. Judge Amara Washington's journey reveals that systemic racism persists even in our most sacred institutions. Her story teaches us that true justice requires courage to challenge powerful systems, even at great personal cost. When Officer Patterson handcuffed her on those courthouse steps, he wasn't just targeting an individual, he was enforcing an unwritten hierarchy that placed authority in certain hands and denied it to others based on race. The lesson here isn't just about discrimination, but about accountability. Systems protect themselves by intimidating those who speak out, manufacturing consequences, and isolating challengers. Yet Amara's story shows that when evidence is gathered methodically and allies unite across different backgrounds, even entrenched corruption can be exposed. We learn that change requires both institutional reform and personal courage. Each person who spoke up, from law clerk Jordan to Officer Daniels to Dr. Carter, created ripples that ultimately transformed the system. Their individual acts of courage, combined with Amara's unwavering commitment to justice, demonstrate that meaningful change rarely comes from institutions voluntarily reforming themselves. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that dignity cannot be taken away by handcuffs or intimidation. By standing firm in her truth and refusing to be silenced. Judge Washington reclaimed her power and created a path for others to follow, turning personal humiliation into systemic transformation. What would you do if faced with injustice in a system you believed in? Would you have the courage to stand up like Judge Washington, even when facing enormous personal and professional risks? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that explores the difficult realities and possibilities of justice in America. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and stayed silent out of fear? Or have you spoken up and faced consequences? Share your experiences in the comments below. If you know someone struggling to find their voice against injustice, this story might give them strength. Please share it with them. Comment Justice Take if you believe institutional change is possible when brave individuals refuse to accept the unacceptable. Thank you for joining me on this journey from humiliation to vindication. Remember, true justice isn't just about laws on paper. It's about how we treat each other with dignity and respect every single day.